What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Stay Tuned for Deep Dives podcast. I am Carter, and I'm with my lovely co-host Tori here today, and we have been building it up, and we're finally here, Tori. We finally reached the end of our mini-series of the eras. It's here.
I'm so excited and ready to cross the finish line.
I know.
And this is going to be, I feel like, an interesting conversation because this era is so tiny. And yet there is much to say.
There really is. And actually today, even though the era is what's so small, I feel like we'll be kind of probably diving more into the outlier than we really will the whole era in itself.
This is true. This is true.
So
there's more to say about
Midnight
in Salem.
That is the understatement. There is more to say about Midnight in Salem.
Although we can't say everything we might want to, or we will be here
forever.
All day.
It's true.
So,
it's true.
But it is true. This is the first outlier, I feel like, that really just shifted things so dramatically that we do have to spend a good chunk of today's episode just talking about the changes that happened with Midnight in Salem.
Yes, we do. There were so many. Okay. And I feel like just to set you guys up that may be listening or watching, you may be super familiar with everything that happened behind the scenes and you may not. So that's why we kind of want to offer a little bit of context about what's going on. And the reason why Midnight in Salem is the outlier, why it's so different, is because of a lot of the changes that were happening in this period in the company. So I just want to point out that the last time that we got Sea of Darkness and I played it, I was like finishing my freshman year of high school. And when I finally got the copy of Midnight in Salem and played it, I was like a sophomore in college. Just to talk about the difference of time there. For those listening,
what was the gap?
A huge gap. For those listening, we have been getting, and you might remember this, we talked about that Max Holacek was responsible for coming out with 2 games a year. And at this point in the company, we've had 32 games, and the majority of those games had been releasing 2 a year for the whole time. And we get Sea of Darkness in like May of 2015, and there's a little trailer at the end about what the next game's going to be, and silence. We go through this nearly 5-year period until we finally get Midnight in Salem. And Tori, there were a lot of things that happened in that 5-year gap.
Wasn't it just like a press release? I remember a press release basically saying, "Hey, we're switching to Unity." Well, I remember the first one, like, "Hey, we're switching to Unity. That means there's going to be a delay." And then
that's where it started.
Almost constant silence. And poor little Jackalope, the number of times people asked, "Any update on Midnight in Salem?" Yeah, because
we are still currently working on this game, and we can provide further updates when we have them.
We were hungry.
Yes, but and I feel like it's important to mention in this episode why that is such a big shift is because we just talked about this in the personal era, right? That Her Interactive is in the heyday of their social period. They are interacting with fans, interacting with their fans in ways that they never have before. They're super social all over all the socials. And then when we get to this point, it's the rug is being pulled out from everyone. Everyone's getting like, wait a minute, you used to talk to me every day, and now you only talk to me a couple times a month. And I feel like we're going through some relationship changes. And that's why
I'm suddenly hearing Her Interactive say, "We were on a break."
Yeah, no, pretty much. I feel like everybody was just not expecting such a drastic change and in not getting information like we once were. And so that's what's happening now here with Midnight in Salem. And not just that they're switching to Unity, and not just that there's this delay in communication and they're just not really interacting, and not just that there's a gap in waiting, but also a huge portion of the team that we were familiar with were
Yeah.
let go.
Yeah, pretty much everyone.
Yeah, so a lot of people were laid off, and that definitely changes things for sure. I know you've done a lot of her interactive deep dives into the family tree, and
Yeah, honest. Yeah.
well, and I was just
Well,
gonna
I was just
say
gonna say we don't really have a tree to share
exactly. We don't have really like a
because
tree to share this episode.
her interactive hardly had anyone, and if I feel when I study the credits for this time period, the thing that stands out the most is the number of completely unfamiliar names because they really had to just rely so much on outsourcing.
Yes.
On not, I know they had outsourced things like character animation was something that for a long time had been outsourced, and obviously the music wasn't in-house. They hired different composers, but then this is just everywhere. They have to get so much outside help. So yeah, sad to say we don't really have a family tree to share now at this point
Which I
because
I feel like just goes to show how
they're just
much
the bare
Midnight
bones.
yeah, like just goes to show how much Midnight in Salem really is an outlier amongst this era that we're about to kind of end on. Is just because so much is new, so much has changed. But even though things are new and even though things have changed, there is an attempt to keep some familiarity. And Tori, I'd love for you to kind of touch on that before we get into some of the things that Midnight in Salem has kind of made it in itself an outlier, a part of the modern era.
Yeah, so Midnight in Salem, as Carter just said, like an attempt was made. An attempt was made to tap into things that had been established from the previous eras. What we're actually going to do now for this part of the episode, we're actually, kind of going to kind of point out things from the different eras that came before that Midnight in Salem was trying to tap into. Some, I would say, more successfully than others. But the key is just because of what we just said, this context that we just gave, because so many things changed at once. The company went through such a staff overhaul, and obviously you're doing an entire switch of game engine, and of course bringing in outsourcing means now you have people working on your game who really have no reason to be familiar with everything you established in the previous
Yes.
32 games, like from a storytelling perspective, from a puzzle style perspective, like
Oh, yes.
everything. What it means is even when they try to pull at things from other eras, it usually ends up it's going to feel different. And kind of the key one. So we're going to start with we're going to go all the way back to the beginning because they did try to tap into a little bit of classic and golden era magic and kind of standards that those eras set. For example, the clearest one being, if anyone has played this game, is that they went back to a letter opening. Nancy writes a letter, has a letter written, and is narrating it to Ned at the beginning of this game. And that's actually something, if y'all hopefully have heard our previous episodes, like that was actually something we talked about, like when the letter opening finally went away. So it's quite interesting that they basically just vaulted completely over, the personal era and the experimental era and went all the way back to like, yeah, let's have her send a letter. I don't know if they were thinking, oh, the fans will really appreciate that. But again, this is the outlier leading into the modern era of Nancy Drew. So, letter writing feels a little bit different. For one thing, because we hadn't seen it in so long, I think, but also because this game, as I remember, is like text messages. This is when text messages start to become really important. Like you can see again the way, and I guess actually that fits too as a golden era thing. Once again, they're drawing our attention to technological developments. because it's really here that finally, Nancy Drew becomes a hardcore like texter. He really never did much with text messages, but now there are entire conversations that you have with people over text messages, and so it feels a little bit like, well, she texts Ned in this game. Why does she also need to send a letter to him? So like it just rings a little bit, I feel like, differently. And I guess we can say thanks for trying, but it doesn't feel the same. And then of course, just as a little side note, of course it's Brittany Cox reading the letter. It's not Lonnie Manella reading a letter anymore, so that's going to create a different feel too. And then just some other things. For example, they did keep second chances, but you remember Carter like takes a really long time to get a second chance in this game. I think not until the very end of the game can you
Yeah,
actually
I don't even
encounter a situation where you
I
encounter
don't
situations where you might actually get a fatal error.
yeah, I don't think so.
I
And I feel
think.
like most of those kind of like quirks and that we know about the Nancy Drew games were very minimal if they were even in the game at all. Like they were just,
Yeah.
you weren't going to experience a lot of
Yeah.
that very often. So,
And I know one I just thought of, and a lot of people like to make fun of this. I think fairly so. It's like they put an Easter egg in the game, a literal Easter egg game, with the very low effort of they threw it into like a plant pot.
Ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Like, really?
wah, wah.
Yep, that's your definition of an Easter egg.
Yeah.
They tried to give us another spooky game. I'm thinking, let's see, it would have been, I think
Ghost
Ghost
of
of Thornton
Thornton Hall.
Hall would have been the last spooky game. So it had been a while since we had gotten a properly spooky Nancy Drew game. So they attempted to bring one back, but I find, and I'm curious if you feel the same way about this, Carter, that the spooks in Midnight in Salem hit a little bit differently because not all of them, but a fair number of them happen in these very like cinematic cutscenes, like where suddenly you're playing, you lose control of movement, the game like screen literally shifts down to like a widescreen box, and you
Yeah.
look like you're watching a movie.
Yeah.
And of course, as soon as I feel like I'm watching a movie, that kind of takes me out of the moment. And I feel like, okay, well, I'm just going to sit back in my chair and watch what happens.
Right.
Like it's not actually happening to me.
And I think that's the sacrifice that they ended up making with trying to keep a foot in what they had done while also trying to do something new, is that like, if you're going to have something modern like cutscenes like it is from a movie, they don't work the same as like if we're talking about classic and golden era like Message in a Haunted Mansion or Curse of Blackmore Manor spooks that occur as you're exploring different areas,
Yeah. Like,
just makes the vibe a little different.
mm-hmm. And then one other one is they did bring back, and I definitely think this was an attempt to try to bridge the gap, is Midnight in Salem had Deirdre Shannon, Frank and Joe Hardy come back, and then they also brought in Carson and Ned as phone characters. But again, I feel like just the shift that happened was so drastic that picking up those characters and placing them in this new kind of Nancy Drew world, they just come across a little bit different to me. And I also do think this is a conversation I think for another time, but I think there are some continuity errors, particularly with Ned and Nancy. I don't feel like where your Ned and Nancy are really fits with what had been happening in the personal era. Like that felt I'm like, wait, suddenly what's going on here? And then Frank and Joe always like they don't know, something about them just feels off. Deirdre Shannon is the only one of those recurring characters that I felt like, oh yeah, that's Deirdre. I think she gets humanized a little bit more in Midnight in Salem, but she still had all of that like sass and that whole like I want to hate Nancy Drew, but I can't actually because I really respect her, like kind of thing. So they tried, and I feel like that's the most we could say. They tried.
Yeah.
I don't think for you and me, I don't think it particularly worked. I don't think it really worked for a lot of fans.
No.
So
And they
yeah.
even actually like tried in the attempt to change a lot of the style of things that we were, kind of used to. And I feel like this fits more into the next era. Like we talked about like all of the, attempts with the character recurring and everything, but even just the style of the game changed a lot too, because I remember when I first opened the game and that menu screen popped, like the way that it popped up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it really wasn't that like the menu screen, like with the burning fire in the background and the grass swaying. I actually didn't really have a whole much problem with that. I thought that was pretty cool. It was really just the layout of the UI and the inventory and all of that stuff became like just white clip art symbols. And what is this? Where is my brown leather bag? Where is my beautiful mahogany wood inventory? Where's my color?
Yes, and can I interject to say, as I hear Carter once again, rightfully so, venting about a UI, do you all remember what other era we had some venting about UI changes? Because this fits right in. The experimental era. And I actually will give credit to you, Carter. I think this is such a insightful observation that another way you have described what happens with the onset of Midnight in Salem is almost like a second experimental era, like comes in. Like we're calling this officially the modern era, and this is the modern era's outlier, but you could just as easily call what's happening right now the experimental era 2.0.
Oh yeah, for sure. I agree.
And we had talked a lot about, y'all can go back and listen if you need to, just to highlight when UI changes were a big deal to Her Interactive was in that era. And we had some beef at that time we felt that White Wolf of Icicle Creek rolled in and kind of depersonalized things and made them very minimalist. I think they kind of got back to something more elegant with the UI change at Tomb of the Lost Queen.
Yes.
But now it's like we've gone back to bare bones. Yes, that very unfinished looking UI. And every time I look at it, I just feel so convinced, like, surely that's just a placeholder, right? Like, did they just not bother to finish it? Because, like, why else would you put this in a game?
Carter
Yes,
was not pleased. I was not pleased.
And another thing that we had mentioned again with our experimental era was there were navigational changes. In that era, third-person navigation
was huge.
Introduced. And in this case, Midnight in Salem, this one time, I'm so glad it seems to only have lasted the one time, this very strange hybrid navigation. And once again, it's like they're trying to span the best of both worlds. And this was a very, very clunky, poor choice. That it's this like point and click and free roam mashed together. And so you get this weird hybrid of you're trying to find the hot spot to click so that you then glide across the screen, and then you can, with your mouse, like you can look wherever you would like. And it's weird. It gives a lot of people motion sickness of the worst kind. And I know for me personally, one of the most frustrating things about playing Midnight in Salem is the navigation, because I can see very clearly, I want to get here. Where in the world do you want me to click? on my screen so I can actually get there, because I feel like Nancy is constantly not going where I want her to. And it's just oh it's not fun.
And
Like,
a lot of people felt that way, you know, when
yeah,
the game.
what was it like for you?
I mean, no, yeah, when the game came out and it was that tutorial at the very beginning where, you know, Brittany as Nancy was like, "It's been a while since I've solved a mystery," and we're just like starting it off with a tutorial of how to be Nancy Drew again because it's been half a decade. So we're sitting here and I just was like spinning around like crazy. I'm like, what am I doing? I don't even know. I don't know how to do anything, you know? So I know for me, it was very difficult to play. And I know for a lot of people, it was very difficult to play, which made playing less playing, less playful and more like, "Rrr," you know? So glad that they cleaned that up for the next game.
Yes. And then one more era
Yes.
would be, how are they trying to link back to in any way the personal era? And in my onion, I think this is the one that's probably the strongest
I
link,
was
which
gonna say the same.
I guess is fitting, because Midnight in Salem would technically be the outlier between the personal era
For sure.
and the modern era. So, of course, as I already alluded to earlier, Ned and Nancy, sadly, are still not done having relationship drama. The Frank, Ned, Nancy love triangle is going strong. And we get a little bit more, I feel like, also like these insights into kind of Nancy's personal life a little bit, kind of in a different way. They're not really fleshing her out with all this like intense backstory. It's more in little things. Like, I do remember Midnight in Salem has a moment, I think it's after she sees Abigail's ghost for the first time. She kind of has this like very disconcerting, where you can see like she's pretty distressed, and I can get this sense that she's kind of wrestling internally of like, I don't think ghosts are real, and yet I have no idea how to explain what just happened. So I feel like she's kind of, that always has come across to me almost like she's questioning her reality a little bit. And I remember, I think Deirdre calls her and she's in like really, sounds very distressed.
Yes.
And then also, this would be more at the end of the game. So spoiler alert coming for a little bit, not for who the culprit is, but there's this moment where she really goes hard after Judge Danforth because she thinks he's being very prejudiced, like being prejudiced towards May and not biased enough like towards his own son, because his son has been involved in some, you know, questionable things. And she gets very like passionate and conveys to me this sense of, this girl really cares about justice being upheld and a sense of fairness and treating people equitably. And so I feel like it does kind of add another layer just to Nancy's personality. And then also, we can touch on this more so, I feel like, in our storylines episode, but also I feel like Midnight in Salem also continues on that personal era trend of the stories got a little bit more, I feel like, mature.
Yeah.
Because we said that in our episode. Midnight in Salem does have some very, what I would say, like true to life, realistic, intensely like personal kind of things going on. Again, not so much with Nancy, but with the other characters, because there's a lot about, like, there's Tegan and Olivia and Lauren. They're not friends anymore, and so we have to figure out, well, what broke them apart. And you know, May has a very very kind of heartbreaking story. So just that's those kind of things.
Oh yeah. And
so
I think,
yeah, anything you would like to add?
no, I was actually going to say
I think that's the strongest link.
that. Well, no, that's what I was going to say, is that I actually agree with you. And I do think that they were trying to carry over what they had finished when they were doing Sea of Darkness. They were trying to still carry some of that stuff over. And I mean, that's also maybe why you see Deirdre again. She showed up in Alibi and Ashes. She's in Deadly Device, and now here she is again. I think they're trying to carry over some of what they had just
The
done
most recent
the
stuff.
most recent
Yeah.
stuff, you know? So I agree. I
right.
think the personal era is the strongest link out of all the eras that they attempted to do. But out of all of the eras that they, you know, tried to pull and kind of mix all up together in this one game, there's a little bit of a sacrifice in the modernization of Nancy Drew. And I think we want to kind of get into a little bit about like, well, how in this modern era are they trying to modernize the Nancy Drew games and Nancy Drew in general? And I think the first one we talked a little bit about was just that there's these cinematic cutscenes that occur a lot. More often in the game. Like, what did you think of the, like, to me, the most distinct one that I just remember very, very sure in my head was the car scene. And the car scene really just was so odd to me because it's like showing the top of the car driving. And I'm like this while I'm playing the game. I'm like, am I supposed to be like, am I just like, I'm just the third person. I'm just here just watching the show. Like, it was very odd because usually everything was more from the perspective of Nancy experiencing it. And with this more modern way of doing things, um, you know, it just kind of took out us being a part of the game. We were almost like this outsider, and it was kind of bizarre. Like, what did you think?
Yeah, it's I don't really remember what I thought in the moment as those things were happening to me. It's more like I feel like it stands out more on replays.
Mm,
Why so many cutscenes? I was
yeah.
actually just speed running the beginning of this game the other day, trying to grab a screenshot of something in preparation for this episode.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the number of times that I had to open the menu and hit the skip cutscene button, I was like,
The fact that there's a
I
button
don't
that's
think
a
I've.
skip cutscene button.
I was like, I don't think I ever registered just how many cutscenes there are. The ones that stand out the most to me are, I would say, the spooks. Probably
Mm.
the one, again, when she sees the ghost for the first time, like she's at the house and it's late at night and she sees the ghost, and then also when she like wakes up the next morning and this creepy head is coming toward her. And I remember that's what I remember the most, because again, it felt like such a different way to experience spookiness. Like I really did always feel anytime those moments would happen, I was like, I feel like I'm watching a movie right now, like a
Mm-hmm.
Nancy Drew movie, not playing a game.
Right.
And it is just a totally different feel. And I agree with you again, because kind of our overarching observation here is there's a cost to modernizing Nancy, and it's this losing of a personal touch. And in this case, the personal touch looks like I suddenly feel like detached, like yes, like what you said, I am an outsider watching this mystery happen to Nancy. It's not me
Mm-hmm.
experiencing it. So we have that a little bit of a wall placed between, I feel like, player and Nancy,
Absolutely.
which we're
Absolutely.
not used to.
Yeah, and again,
But
I'm not
yeah.
against cutscenes. Like, I think they're really cool and can be used in better ways. Which I think when we talk about Mystery of the Seven
Yeah.
Keys, we kind of get more into how the cutscenes could work better, and I think they do a better job in the next game. But you know, they're finding their footing here in
Mhm.
Midnight in Salem, and even in just the graphics, which I know we talked a little bit about a while ago, just about how things are not as pretty, you know? Um,
Yeah. And well, I think we might as well just mention that probably one of the number one criticisms that I have always heard of Midnight in Salem is so many people say it looks unfinished.
mm,
And there are some definitely high quality, very polished looking elements in it if you're able to play the game on the highest graphics. Like
sure.
it's more little details, I feel like people's clothing
Right.
and stuff like that. but there is just this sense of some of the actually the one speaking of cutscenes and that car scene you brought up, the one
You
that
can see
always
the
stands out
fibers
to
of
me is
Deirdre.
when no, I'm thinking more in terms of the it's an unfinished game criticism. Do you remember in that car scene when they're talking to each other and they drive by the Hathorn house and it's during the day?
Yes.
Um, that scene looks so unfinished. Like the coloring is all off, and I don't even know how to describe it. That it's like they just rushed to stick something in for that scene. Like surely that can't be what it was actually meant to look like. Like that's how it comes across to me. And there's things kind of just little things where it doesn't have, I feel like, that personal touch of where it really, I'm picturing those things in the previous games where, things very, you can tell like an artist actually sat down and very carefully like drew the thing out. Like that does seem to be missing, and I don't know how much of that is just how the Unity engine works and just like your game assets are going to look different in
Well,
that engine.
and can I
Like I
just
don't
mention,
know.
for me,
It does feel different.
I honestly, I don't need to see the fibers on someone's sweater. That doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is if things look beautiful and they're like the ambience and environment is like I can attach to. And I think that's kind of that lacklusterness that maybe the graphics and art just kind of missed, is like you could see these buildings and they were like boxes and the walls were pretty plain. But there are other games where when you actually like really pay attention and like look around, there's so much detail on everything. Everything.
Yeah, well, I was actually thinking maybe the most helpful way to talk about this is kind of to do some comparisons. Like for example, I am picturing those Jake Hurley's train cars.
Yes.
In Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon, and every single one of those train cars has such a distinct personality, unique colors and patterns, and you can just tell that those artists, they put so much time into giving every one of those train cars
the molding,
a beautiful,
how it's like all carved and
a beautiful look. And then you step into Midnight in Salem and it really does just feel, it just all feels very modern. Like I can't think of a single building in that game that you can walk into and really where you could kind of just like fawn over really artistic details.
Yeah. They went more for like realistic than they did for art.
Yeah. Like the Perry's house, to me, it looks like a house. Like, okay, it's just a house. There's not really any unique personality or charm to it.
Right.
And I actually think another great example that stands out is, how about the difference in kind of personality, or in Midnight in Salem's case, lack thereof. Like Salem is meant to convey the sense of a small town. What's the other small town in the Nancy Drew games? Probably the best example would be River Heights, if you want to compare those two. And just think of those individual places. Like you actually don't get to wander around that much of River Heights, but the places that you do get to go to, like the Scoop Shop and Alexi's shop, even the police station, like even just the exteriors of all of those buildings. Like don't even factor in going inside them. Like they all, just as soon as you look at them, to me, they are just brimming with like a unique kind of personality and artistry.
I agree.
That I don't get from Salem, Massachusetts.
Right.
In this game.
No, I absolutely agree. It's lacking that bit of charm. It's lacking that bit of charm.
And then of course, people have been very hard on Midnight in Salem's characters for yes. Like you want to talk about lifeless, Yeah, we get these very robotic and kind of out of control movements. Yeah, just dramatic gestures like hands waving in the weirdest way. Like who would ever do that? I've heard people commonly complain about these newer games. They always say that they feel like the characters have, they call them dead eyes. Yes, and it is kind of scary in this game. Yeah, you can turn some of the looks you get from people. Like they really do just feel like they're going bug-eyed, staring you down. Yes.
For me, it
Carter
was
is
just the fact that
perfectly
the characters,
demonstrating.
oh my gosh, all the protesters, same thing over and over again. Same thing over again. Whatever it is, that phrase that they repeat,
Oh.
and they're just always there. And I'm like, you know what? I would love to absorb the fall vibes out here. You guys are truly killing the fall vibes out here. So yeah, but you know what?
But you,
it wasn't.
you do like one of you like one of those protesters. You got to shout out the one who's doing the T pose or what.
It's so funny. I hope we can find a picture of it so we can throw it up in here just so everybody knows what I'm talking about. But there's just, I think it's right outside the window of the courthouse. There's one random
just
protester.
You see an arm, I think.
Oh man.
So
but
funny.
even beyond just the characters, there's a lot of
more to Modernize.
Well, yeah, and it goes even to the main actress that has now replaced Lonnie for the Nancy Drew voice, which is a very, very hot topic in the Nancy Drew community.
Yeah. The reason basically being it's time to have a younger sounding Nancy, someone who we can listen to and actually believe sounds like a teenager.
And just a disclaimer, we're really not going to get too much into the whole backstory of like, well, what happened to Lonnie? Because honestly, there's so much information out there about that. And there's nothing concrete, like good, solid information to get anything from. We just know that there was some kind of something and Lonnie was let go. And it seems that they were trying to find a more, youthful voice that would carry on their series.
Yeah.
And
regardless of what the relations were between her Interactive and Lonnie Manella at this time, like the reality is, Lonnie definitely was, I feel like, starting to sound older as you go deeper and deeper into the personal era. Like I can hear her age in her voice more and more. So this is a matter of like, this is just the way reality is. Like Lonnie wasn't going to be able to voice Nancy forever, and it just so happens like this is the game that they decided to make the change for. And that, of course, comes at a cost because, well, I think Carter and I feel like you and I are kind of in a similar position on this, where like we're rooting for Brittany Cox and we're trying to give her a chance and wanting her to be successful, but feeling like it's not there yet.
For sure. I mean, I would like to see her, do well with the voice for sure, but agree that it's definitely not there yet.
Well, and to tie it into kind of our specific point that you're modernizing with this at the cost of you're losing some of this like personal touch and some of this charm.
Yeah.
Carter and I have mentioned before, I know we definitely brought this up, the classic era episode, that despite Lonnie not sounding like an 18-year-old, like at no point do I think Lonnie Manella ever like sounded like an 18-year-old. That doesn't really matter because she just brings such a liveliness and a quirkiness and a charm to Nancy's voice that like we don't, and also like Nancy's timeless. Like Nancy's 95 this year, so it's okay, I think, if she doesn't sound like a teenager. Like, does she have to sound like a teenager? She's also almost 100 years old, technically.
I know,
so,
and I never really know how to take.
And Brittany I don't think Brittany's found that
Yeah, and I don't really
that
know how to take those
intangible.
conversations really about like Lonnie and like what age she sounded like, because for me it was always different because I just never even thought about it. Like it never was a question in my mind when I played the games. And so when I do hear people, say, well, she never really sounded like an 18-year-old, and I just never even really thought about it. I just played. I just never even thought about it. And so I agree with you. I did hear Lonnie's change somewhere in that. I think it was starting. I was like, oh, okay, I can hear it. Like it's starting to get a little dropped to where she just can't be as high pitched as she once was. And you're right, that is inevitable. And at some point they were going to have to, of course, go a different route, which is so, I think for most fans, it's just like that's hard. That's
Well,
a,
it was always going to be hard.
it's
You have the
yeah,
same
because like
voice
you're
for 32 games.
exactly like
It
you're
was never
just
going to
so
be easy.
used to it that it's just going to be hard. And I am on the camp that there could be someone out there that, yes, I have Lonnie's version in my head, and like I can take someone new and still go with it. It can't be so different from Lonnie though. That's where I think the problem comes in, is because what Lonnie has created, that's gotta kind of keep going, because you can't have such a harsh just slice, and we have to be like, yeah, this is still Nancy. Like I feel like that's
Yeah.
too hard. And for me, I think the biggest thing to say is just if Brittany could have some more warmth, I think that would help. If she just had a little bit more, instead of a cooler tone, more of like a warmer tone, which would help bring in some quirkiness and help bring in some of that spark that we're talking about, I think that would help. And I agree. I do. I've actually listened to Brittany's other work, and she has a very phenomenal voice, and has done many cool characters before. I'm hoping that either she can kind of pull out some more Nancy Drew-esque voice qualities that I feel like Nancy would sound like, or maybe I would hate to say we'd have to find someone, because you can't keep changing it. That's the problem. So I don't know. I don't really know where to conclude in my own thoughts with that. So
Yeah, well, again, I think, as we mentioned, like we're in a difficult position because
It
we have
is.
this Outlier and we have one other game.
Exactly.
Well,
It's hard to
what can
assess.
you? It's really hard to put your stake in the ground, I feel like, on
You're right.
anything with just two games to work with.
Exactly.
So,
And that's why I agree
we're
with
talking
you.
about things as best we can, but
This is true.
This is a harder episode than
It is
normal
harder.
because
And
there's so little to work with.
And it is true what you were saying. I do wish her the best, and I do hope that she's able to kind of step more into that role. And I realize, again, we've only had 2 games, and I do think she did better in the Mystery of Seven Keys than she did Midnight in Salem. So I will take the full optimistic train. Like that's fine. I'll climb
Yep.
aboard.
Yeah, we shall see if we can get that.
I don't
that
know
charm
what are you
back with
where are
Nancy.
you kind of at with just how you feel about Nancy Drew's new voice?
I would say something. Current issues with Brittany, I don't describe them in terms of like warm versus cool. The way I have framed it in my own mind is, right now she sounds too, I guess I will say, too prim and proper, too professional to me. It always sounds to me like
I think that's what I mean too.
Oh, okay. Well, it just sounds to me like she really is trying, to read things very clearly, but they're not coming across to me like they don't feel natural to me. It feels, I guess, I don't know, sterile and very, very much just we're in a recording booth recording lines. I'm having a hard time. Sometimes she'll say something and I'll be like, oh yeah, that felt very like in the moment. But then sometimes I'll just feel like, no, that just sounds like you know that was a really good take you gave, and that's that's the one they decided to go with.
Yeah. No, and I think
not that
that's
you're
kind of like what I'm
talking.
what I'm feeling too with the coolness and warmth,
Okay.
because I feel like with warmth things are more casual, with coolness things are more like that what you're talking about, that sterileness and professionalness. And
Okay.
because Nancy, to me, the way it is she is quirky and she does say funny things, like, hey there,
Actually,
hey, what did she used to say in like Treasure in the Royal Tower? She'd be like, hey dead end, I'm Nancy Drew. Like, and I always think of
or
things like that.
okay, see ya, Mr. Egan.
Exactly. Instead of,
Yeah,
okay, see ya, Mr. Egan. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just
yeah,
very,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, do
It changes
yes,
it.
no, I, I, I'm with you on that, and I'm like
Mm-hmm.
trying to be optimistic. And again, I know this is not just a Brittany thing. Like, hopefully, the people responsible for the coaching and
Sure.
recording the dialogue can maybe become more aware of some of these
Of the
things,
fan
and
feedback, yes.
they'll figure that, yeah, because certainly they do not lack for fan feedback on
Right.
what we think of Nancy's voice. So
Right.
we'll see with that. Yeah, so that's kind of what that I'm thinking. Like, I'm willing to be I'm like you, willing to be optimistic, but she's not Nancy yet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think. So I think, yeah, that's kind of what Midnight in Salem is pushing us towards. Again, now we're just gonna see continued modernization, and as once we move on to our Mystery of the Seven Keys, we can revisit, like, is there a way to have modernization and also have some of that charm? Like, we'll revisit that in a little bit. But I feel like another thing that's important to bring up again with Midnight in Salem is this game is kind of very important in the history of the series, in terms of, I feel like this marks another spot where we see they're reaching a new audience, or trying to reach a new audience, and also just having to make adjustments to what's going on in the video game world.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be aware of what your market is like, and adapt as necessary. So we have kind of a few different things to touch on with this. Like, for example, I know a big one that we all wish is, why can't we just keep using the old game engine? That's another common, like, desire that I hear from fans. It's like, oh, what was wrong with the game engine? Like, Sea of Darkness looks so gorgeous. Like, why couldn't they have just made another game with that engine? Like, just keep making point and click. Why did it need to change? Well, again, this is things, I'm not an expert on any of this. My understanding from things that other people have said is, I think, just like long term, it just wasn't sustainable. My understanding is, like, this was like, I think this was a game engine, like they had built it in house, and it just, long term, there was just a lot of things involved in it. Like, it wasn't really practical to keep trying to make games with it, that I think they needed something that was more like an industry standard, such as the Unity engine. But then, of course, there was the reasoning that they conveyed to the fans, which was, remember they had put out a survey, right? I think it was like they wanted to know, like, kind of what we want in Nancy Drew games.
I filled that survey out.
I did too. And then they came back, with that initial press release, and they said, well, like, we want to give you more characters. We want to give you longer gameplay and more puzzles and more environments. And we feel like in order to do this, we need to use Unity. So, that was one of their reasons for switching. And then there's some other things, if you want to mention any of these, Carter.
Yeah.
Or I know also you have thoughts about this is not so much like, it wasn't immediately when Midnight in Salem came out? Because it came out in what, December
2019.
2019? But I know you have made a lot of good observations in terms of like how Midnight in Salem fits into when the pandemic hit and stuff like that. So
Yeah. Well, I
whatever
always,
you know about this.
yeah, I always say this, and I just kind of feel this is just how I feel about it, is that if the pandemic had not happened, I just feel like Her Interactive would maybe not be as in such of a good place. They release Midnight in Salem in December 2019, and granted, a lot of people, if you remember, Tori, like it was released in December 2019, but there was also some delay in people receiving their physical copies, and some people had tech support issues, and so it still wasn't like people just
Okay.
immediately got the game. There was some lingering there, and then it was right before the holidays, so I really feel like people didn't get to dive right in. I know I was in my final season, and fortunately I was able to, I didn't have any problems like downloading and getting the game to work on my laptop, but that was another issue, that a lot of people had problems with the graphics working on their computer. So anyways, a lot of people just didn't get to play the game right when it came out. So there's some delay. Well, just 3 months later, the pandemic happened. And when the pandemic happened and everybody was at home and everybody was working from at home, and what that created worldwide was this huge consumption of media. People needed something to watch and play at home. And thus, streaming went to an all-time high. Like, there was, of course, the Twitch streams and Twitch parties back in like 2017 were Her Interactive.
Mm-hmm.
But at this time, 2020 and 2021, everybody streamed. Like, streamers were everywhere now, and that's because people now were at home and they needed more content to consume, and so lots of more content creation was coming out about these games than ever before. People were creating a lot of ranking videos and theory videos, and like all of this is happening. So basically, and also if you remember Gab Smolders, I think they had collaborated with her for Midnight in Salem. That was her first game she played, and then everybody was telling her like, oh, like, I think you would really enjoy some of the older, spookier Nancy Drew games because they're really not like this. They, like, all of her fans were trying to convince her, like, please give it another chance. Like, it's not going to be just like this, because not that she didn't have like a good time, but it wasn't like, the best thing that she had played on her channel before. And so she ended up going for Shadow at Water's Edge, and she loved it. And then she ended up from there going to, I can't remember, I think it was another game, Out of Order. And at some point, their fans convinced her.
I want to say Curse the Blackmore Manor, because I've actually
I feel like it was another spooky one. So like it had, yeah.
I've been watching her.
No, Ghost of Thornton Hall.
Oh yes, and
that's
then
what
it was Curse of Blackmore Manor. But she kept hitting all these
spooky games,
older spooky
because
games.
that's what she played on her channel. Like, she was into spookier games, and so eventually they convinced her, you need to play from the beginning, because she enjoyed them. She enjoyed those older games that she played, and then she played the whole series all the way through. And it was for people like that spread Her Interactive's games to audience members that had never even heard of the games before. And so it created this like surgence of people kind of entering into the series that would have never heard about it before. And so I feel like with Midnight in Salem, it may not have done as well if it had not been for this like surgence of content creators like making YouTube content, and Instagram. Our Instagram Clue Crew community grew during the pandemic time. And so just different things like that, I feel like kind of helped give a door that was not possible for Her Interactive to get their game and their company out to people that had never played before. So and then I think they started kind of catching on that was the route they needed to go. So they started collaborating with all these streamers, and they started collaborating with tons of people on YouTube, and then Instagram eventually, when that started growing. So I agree with your assessment that at this time, I feel like this is them trying to reach and grow a new audience, but also at the same time appease the audience that they have had for so long.
Yeah, and it makes Midnight in Salem again so fascinating to me as an outlier, because now I kind of feel like what you just said, like, again, they're like testing waters again. Which this is another way where we can say kind of we're vaulting back to a previous era, and yet things are feeling different. Like we already said, they kind of initiate, like, we are in another experimental era.
Yeah.
And okay, don't hear what I'm not saying. Okay, it's like we've gone back to another classic era. Okay, here's what I'm not saying. I am not saying Midnight in Salem is at the level of a classic era game, or that it's ever going to be. Like, it's we're not talking about, I don't mean classic in the sense of like, oh, we just got our next message in a haunted mansion. Like, even though there's a sense in which I suppose you could say what makes Midnight in Salem Message in a Haunted Mansion similar is that they actually both function as a gateway game for a lot of fans. Like, I think there are a lot of new within the last few years, new Nancy Drew fans, such as Gab Smulders or whoever else, who will say, like, I found this series because of Midnight in Salem. Like, they saw it on Steam and they tried it, and then they ended up playing the rest of the games. Like, but obviously, as we've already touched on in many different ways, people don't love, and I don't think they're ever going to love Midnight in Salem the way they love Message in a Haunted Mansion. But we are back to what Carter and I had addressed with the classic eras. One of the things that you see is, once again, we see Her Interactive in a position of trying to figure out what works. But as Carter has mentioned, and I feel like, again, where we have to say always, like, it's kind of like this, but it's really not, because things are different. At that time, again, we're bringing in the 90s kids. They're playing their first Nancy Drew game, possibly with family, and they are just eating it up and loving it. What's happening now with Midnight in Salem is we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we make modern Nancy Drew games in a new game engine? And they're bringing in new fans, but they have a pre-existing fan base who is very upset and feeling very not like they feel like they can't really trust Her Interactive, and are like, I just, like, the relationship is in a much rockier situation. And I think again, we can go back to, thank you for bringing it up earlier, what you had said, kind of that whole issue of, again, we have that personal era. We got so used to having those interactions, and then suddenly it's like they slammed the door shut in our faces. Yeah. So that was jarring and very upsetting to a lot of people. Like, why won't you just tell us anything? Stop saying, like, we have nothing to share. We'll tell you as soon as we can. Yeah, like, people got so sick of that line, and I feel so bad for, Kalina and whoever else had to, just because of who was telling them, they just, it's what you just got to keep telling them. Like, sorry. So that was really hard. So yes, and of course, we've all lived through it. We all know how frustrating this period, and then the fact that it went on again for literally years. We're just waiting. Like, tell us anything. Are you even working on this game? Like, what is going on? So I feel like we have now a situation where Clue Crew doesn't really trust Her Interactive because they weren't communicating, and that creates feelings. And then, of course, so then we have this, like, what actually happens when Midnight in Salem came out. And I'm curious, Carter, like, when they started releasing, like, screenshots and actual, like, not character concept art, but when we actually started seeing, like, what the characters looked like in the game for the first time. Like, I remember when those Facebook posts started going up. Suddenly they were showing us visuals of things, and I also remember when the trailer came out for the first time, and how horrified I was. Like, what what was that like for you that we've had this long wait? Finally, they give us stuff, and it's like, wait, what? This is what it looks like?
Yeah, I just remember
I'm
constantly being like
confused.
let down. Like I was like, man, I just wish that this didn't look like this, you know? Because it had been so long. And honestly, that was such a huge disconnect of Nancy for me in that period of waiting. Because I mean, I think, play the games like I did a bunch of replays probably from like 2015 to 2017. But then once I started university in 2017,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the time, and so that 2 years was just a huge disconnect. And then when they did start unveiling stuff, I was like, this is not what I expected because we've waited so long. I was
Right.
expected to be blown away, and I'm not feeling that.
Yes, and I felt the same way. I figured, well, like, wow, if we're waiting 5 years for something,
Yeah,
it's going to look really good. And
exactly.
then it did not. And I know a lot of people kind of feel like almost like Her Interactive, it's like they just decided to give us the game. Like just because
I
they felt
think that
like it's
too.
like
I
like
felt that way.
you know what? We've made people wait long enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like we just
Just
got to
let's
put
just
it out
save it
there.
and just send it
It's
out.
just I know a lot of people like that's whether that was what actually happened, I don't know, but that's how it comes across to people of like, oh,
Yeah.
almost like they got tired of hearing from our complaints, or were concerned that they were gonna like lose people. Like, okay, if we don't do something, like we're gonna lose them forever. So we just got to make a move.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was I remember too. I was like, wait, why does it look like this?
Yeah.
This looks weird and not
It was
not
so much
good.
change at one time. I just
Yes. And then this is the next issue, and we already said like I feel like this is, if we're talking like seismic shifts, Midnight in Salem really did, everything changed. We brought it up. New Nancy voice, new graphics, new UI, new navigation, like list boom 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 boom. Like it's not just like they kind of slowly introduced changes and gradually shifted us over to something. It's just, whew, okay, we're gonna do it all. We're gonna do it all at once, and that's jarring.
oh
And
yeah.
shocking. And again, because of the lack of communication, I think that made it hard. I think that makes it harder to like accept it. Maybe if we all had been like as fans felt like we were on better terms with Her Interactive, maybe it would have been more like, okay, it's different. But okay, we'll find a way to get used to it.
Oh yeah.
But
And I feel like the biggest change out of all the changes, other than for me like being Lonnie's new voice, was just the fact that we had such a gap of time where like there was no
yeah,
new game. And I think a lot of fans, I know for sure, I did, I was used to those 2 games a year. Like I was set with that, and I loved that. I loved that it was like, Nancy Drew game for Christmas, like during the holiday season, and then
mm-hmm.
Nancy Drew game, in just a few months after that, and play it, to the summer. So having that gap of time where there was nothing, that was a hard thing
Yeah,
to adjust to.
yeah. Because they had gotten us so used to that. And again, that started, it was the classic era, right? When that
Mm-hmm.
started?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty
So
early
that's
on.
yeah. So we had been used to that, and it's always interesting to me because I've heard from Clue Crew people who kind of like exist in another video game fandom. They kind of actually talk about, I can't, of course, off the top of my head, can I think of an actual example? No, I'm sure someone listening has an example, but I know that there are other like video game series where you do have to wait years
Oh yeah.
between the releases, but it was always that way.
Right.
People didn't have this like pre-existing expectation of we get 2 games a year, and that's actually something I don't I don't know if you've come across this, but something I've noticed sometimes when I hear people kind of learning about the Nancy Drew games for the first time,
Oh, they
they'll
get
actually comment
shocked.
on like, how in the world did they crank out 2 games a year? Like it really was. As
It's
it just
impressive.
reinforces, yeah, like Max Holochek,
Was
Mr. Responsible.
responsible.
Yes, like he really did work some magic. That
Yes.
yeah, it's like we had an unheard
And
of thing.
good games. Good games 2 times a year. That's really hard to do.
Yeah, his games were good games.
Oh,
Yes,
man.
definitely.
But I feel
Yes.
like, that kind of brings us to, like we have Midnight in Salem. It is the outlier. And we're entering into this modern era of Nancy Drew. And so now here we are. And there is now Mystery of the Seven Keys, which we get to kind of dive into as far as what with Mystery of the Seven Keys and Midnight in Salem, what's the feedback from fans that they looked at with Midnight in Salem and they're like, maybe we didn't hit the mark here, and how can we like change those things a little bit as far as getting more into our footing of where we're going to take these games now.
Yeah. So kind of that is definitely something that I kind of feel like is a key characteristic of the modern era, at least for now, is that we are paying very close. Yes, we are paying very close attention to how Her Interactive is responding to fan feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely like Mystery of the Seven Keys has very clear aspects to it where you can tell that they were very aware
And I felt
of
that.
Midnight in Salem's most common criticisms, and they responded. For example, they did the shift of they went to less dialogue and more puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
Again, people really, really were unhappy about how the characters looked. So we did get
Improved.
much improved character models and their animations. And then also just it's much more polished of a game. Visually,
yes.
it does look more finished. And then I think we need to go back to very specifically, when we were harping on that awful, minimalist, bare bones, unexciting UI that Midnight in Salem had, where it's just like, did you even try? No, you didn't. It really seems like you didn't. They made much more of an effort, I feel like, with Mystery of the Seven Keys UI to bring some personality to it. Again, it's not all of it's perfect, but when you load up the game for the first time, you get that very dramatic, like the music starts playing, and then there's that big keyhole on the screen, and it opens up, and then the main menu, I feel like, again, just little things, like even just rather than doing that simple like white text, it's like some sort of like a brown color, I think, and then they put little like kind of boxes around each one, so just a little bit more detail, and it's behind, like there's that visual of the Prague like cathedral, I think, in the courtyard in the background. And then the other thing that you and I have talked about before that we both really love, that they took the time to do this, is those kind of watercolor style loading screens.
Beautiful.
Those are gorgeous.
And they didn't even have to add that. They just added that for the sake of adding it, and that is what I love. I love that.
And I've heard some people say like they loved the art style of those loading screens so much they said, I'd play the Nancy Drew game with that art style. Like that's how much they loved the look of it. And also just, visually, like they really did take the time, I feel like, more. And maybe it helps because we're in Prague instead of Salem. Like, I don't know how much of a difference that makes. But of course, Prague being an old world city, but they did absolutely like try to get those very, careful, ornate details of the things. Like I'm picturing the clock, or like, you know, the way the stones look on the ground, or all the artwork and designs on the building. Like it certainly does look, even though it's still in the Unity engine, so it does have a different look to it when you're seeing it on the screen.
Still better than
like it's
mid.
still it's definitely better. I do feel like there's so much more. There is so much more like detail. I feel like that I can just stand and appreciate in Mystery of the Seven Keys. And actually, this is a very particular thing that I've been working on. This was like a few weeks ago on my Instagram. I posted doors from the Nancy Drew games, and I started with the first two eras, and I just found all, like, there's a lot of beautiful doors. Like I was like, let me just look at all the doors. And I haven't finished posting from the other eras yet, but I went into Mystery of the Seven Keys and I was pleasantly surprised. I found, I want to say, like 3 or 4 very beautiful doors, and I'm like, this is so exciting to me. Like, they put the work in.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think we can commend them. You know, even Mystery of the Seven Keys. We're not, visually, no, we're not saying it's perfect, but absolutely, you can see that it's a step up, and they are pulling in some more of that charm, which I now feel leads into kind of another key characteristic of the modern era. Again, so far, everything we're saying is like we're holding it very, very loosely, because who knows what the next game may introduce. But we're seeing now this possibility that they're trying to, and I think doing a better job of. They are pursuing like new ideas. We've modernized Nancy, and so we're going to explore what that looks like. But also they are trying to tap, I would say, further and better into the tradition of the previous era.
And I feel like
so
that's probably
you want to give.
I was just gonna say, I feel like that's probably the biggest like pin, if we could just pin that on the modern era and say that's the biggest thing that they're going for right now is modernizing Nancy, but we're still trying to keep touches of what we built in the past into this new modern era. I feel like that's the best way to wrap it all up. Like, that is, you just nailed it right there how you said that.
Yeah. Well, and can you give us some specifics?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, okay. Well, number one way was this second chance, which was, oh my gosh, it was just, I got happy. Did you get happy? I got happy when I saw the second chance and it was like da 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 da, and I was like, oh, what's this? Oh, I died, but I'm happy because this looks good. And so it was wonderful because, you know, Midnight in Salem lacked that. Mystery of the Seven Keys had that. Ooh, pin that on a pillow somewhere. But no, really, it was so good because it had style, it had color, it was fun how it had a little sound effect. But how did they keep it how they used to have it? Well, they had the good news, bad news, how the experimental era had it. And I was like, oh, okay, callback. That's wonderful. That's great. I love, thank you for honoring the tradition, but moving forward with the future, that's wonderful. And then one thing that you and I both cling to, that we both felt was a very important thing, was the fact that,
and we will have more to say about.
We will,
like
is the fact
when we actually
had a physical, nice, lovely journal taskless thing, and it was both modern because it utilized Nancy's phone, but we also had a physical, and it was great because it called back to the physicality of what Nancy brings with her when she goes on a mystery. And I was like, thank you. Like, these things just make sense. I don't know whose idea that was, but whoever's it was, they needs a raise. Okay, and they need to be promoted. Because that just makes sense. And then you can maybe touch about this. What about the spooky, scary moments? Because I feel like they were a bit more natural this go around.
Yeah, I do think that they did a better job of balancing between Mystery of the Seven Keys does still have cutscenes.
Yes.
But do think kind of with those like spookier and more intense moments that they did a better job of making sure that it happens to us. Like in the moment, they're not taking us out of the moment and making us just watch it. They're allowing us to actually experience
Be a
it.
part of it.
For example, when you go on the haunted tour in the museum and you have to walk around and you are walking around amid all that fog. And I know there's that one audio button you can press and like spiders start spilling out.
Ooh.
And
I remember
the
that.
creepily dramatic narrator, like, if you dare, like he's going, talking in your ear, and there's all these creepy sound effects, and that felt very like immersively spooky.
It felt very Curse of Blackmore Manor to me. When I was I just because like the little spooks that were happening, although it was like a part of the tour, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like all the little spooks that happen in Curse of Blackmore Manor where I'm like, oh, what's going to happen? And I don't know. Yes. I feel like I'm having that same vibe here.
And I definitely kept like watching that night over in the corner, like
same. Terrified.
Like, if you come alive, like I am yeeting my computer, like I'm quitting. Like this is not going to end well. Like that night had better not come to life. Yeah, and so that was very immersive. And then also there is an intense chase sequence in this game. Oh boy, was that an experience. Like I still kind of get the shivers just thinking about how that felt. Like that was uniquely one of the most intense experiences I feel like I've had in a Nancy Drew game like ever. So that was extremely immersive. But they did still have cutscenes, like Nancy has to capture someone, and a big chunk of that plays out in a cutscene. And so they didn't just get rid of the cutscenes, but I do feel like
it was just well incorporated.
They got a much better balance going on with that. And then another one, and I think that we can thank the big three, Rue, Indy, and Brigella,
our heroes.
That there were more references to previous games. I think they really tried to make sure, and again, this would tie into what we said at the very beginning of the episode, that Her Interactive is now having to rely on outsourcing. So what do you do with this issue if you have people working on your game and they don't really understand the universe? Well, thankfully, we have people like those ladies who I think really did make a big effort to try to make sure that those references, like Nancy will make little comments in her journal about someone, or their little things that you can pick up or look at in game. Like I know you can see, I think it's on Radix marionette cart, like you can see the doll Chantilly Hildegard. And I think you can go when you're snooping in Merrick's area, you can see that. I think like I want to say like Emily Griffin and Melina from Labyrinth of Lies, and maybe someone else, like they all apparently all had items inspected by Merrick at some point. So
which is so fitting.
We see those little things, and it's like, or especially, or like all the books in the library. They actually took books from previous games and put them on those library shelves.
Sure.
So there was much more of an effort to try to connect the two universes. Of like, yes, this is modern, but still Nancy Drew. And then rather than trying to have the best of both worlds in one with that awful hybrid navigation, they just decided to like, okay, we will totally split them. And so we have and I think it's fitting how they termed it. They call it classic mode. You can do point and click. Or you can do modern mode, which is fully free roam first person movement. So and
again, if that is not a huge indicator that what is the big overlying thing with the modern era is that we're trying to do something new while also trying to honor the tradition of what we've already done. And I feel like that's what we're going to see a lot
Yes.
in the next and whatever comes next. I feel like we're going to see that a lot.
Yeah, I would expect they're going to try to keep leaning into that. And I did just want to mention again, this is more of a, I think this is helpful context, getting more of a just an understanding of her Interactive's mindset on these things. So this was actually Rue. So Rue is no longer at the company.
Big
She left
sad.
in the fall,
Love you, Rue.
but she recently, like a few weeks ago, did an interview. Just spilling the tea with Susie interview, and actually some mystery of the Seven Keys related things came up, and Rue actually said that kind of their approach is, and it fits right in. It's right in with this. Like, you made this observation, Carter, without knowing like what was actually going on, according to Rue, like how they were approaching things, is that they are coming into it with this mindset of we are trying to revamp Nancy. Like, that's the truth. We're not trying to make more of the same. She is being revamped. But they're trying to get at those, she described them, I think, as touches of nostalgia, which I think conveys what's going on here. Like, they for now they have committed to a new way of Nancy Drew games, but they are trying to give the fans those little glimmers of, here's what an old one feels like. Now, whether that's successful is a different question, but at the very least, like that's their goal.
Yeah.
That's what's going on.
And I feel like
with the modern era.
Yeah, and I feel like
for now,
I feel like what we're saying about the modern era makes sense. I feel like all of that is where we're headed. And like we've mentioned earlier, it is difficult to assess an era when, you've got the first game and it's really the outlier and it's their first game that they're starting to kind of work towards, and then this one other game, and there's really just not much to go off of. But I feel like we definitely have done our best in trying to assess where we're headed. But if you remember in last week's episode, I actually got to share a little bit of my onions about when the series changed for me, and that was actually really eye-opening for me. It was awesome to be able to kind of explore maybe unanswered feelings that I haven't really gotten to tap into. And so I thank you for allowing me the space to do that. But this week is also special because now we get to do the reverse, and I get to ask Tori this question because we actually had differing onions and just overall feelings about when the series felt different for each of us. And so Tori, now I get to put you in the hot seat this week and say, when did the series feel different? What was going on, and what were you feeling at that time when things were changing? And just kind of tell us about it.
So, yes, I will try my best to answer this, and I will just preface like I feel like my feelings are actively still like changing and developing on this, which is fitting since I'm choosing to answer this question in the context of I'm saying that the series changed for me with the modern era. But I'm going to come at this maybe in a way you wouldn't expect, because I'm imagining probably what people are expecting me to say is maybe something like Nancy's voice changing. That made a big difference. The navigation, it being a Unity game, those all, yeah, of course. That's going to make a Nancy Drew game feel different. That's actually not the angle that I'm coming from. I really had to think about this question. And it's interesting that just how we each individually perceive these games. So I was thinking a lot about, like, in one sense, what you said last week about kind of this sense of like, I think for you, it boiled down to you kind of felt like the magic changed and maybe, I guess, lessened a little bit in the personal era. And I totally resonate and agree with you on that. But maybe it's just because of who I am, because I have like an English background and I'm a reader and went to school for English and stuff like that, that when I was stopping and thinking about it, I'm like, no, the way I answer this question boils down to, when do I feel like the stories, like the story universe changed. And so here's what I mean by that. When I play games 1 through 32, despite the personal era, definitely I feel kind of amping up the maturity and the darkness. It has enough connections to the older games. It has enough of the Nancy and other like character like quirkiness and the humor that I still believe, like, yeah, I'm still in the Nancy Drew universe playing a Nancy Drew game. And then what happened is Midnight in Salem comes along. And this really boils down to like Midnight in Salem just threw a wedge into my little heart and like erected a wall, and I'm trying to figure out how to respond to that. Is when I stepped into the world of Midnight in Salem, even though it's telling me like this is a Nancy Drew mystery, you're playing as Nancy Drew right now. Deirdre Shannon's here, Frank and Joe's here, Ned Nickerson's on the phone, Carson's on the phone. It all just felt like a different story universe. I don't know if that makes sense. What I'm trying to say. Like I just felt like the only thing that was the same was like that. Yeah, it's Nancy Drew and she's a teen detective, but it's like it's almost like we started over. Like that's a different Nancy Drew. And even though I'm hearing Scott Carty voicing Ned Nickerson, that doesn't feel like Ned to me. Like their relationship, that seems off. The way Ned is potentially behaving right now seems off. When Frank and Joe are talking, everything just felt, that's the best way I can describe it. Things just felt off. And
do you think, is it possible that maybe because there was that gap and so many of the ones that had their hands kind of on the games and had consistently, they were for the past few games had their hands on it, all of that was gone, and so now the world building that was trying to kind of keep that world going couldn't keep it going because they were unfamiliar with the world that had already been created?
Yeah. I mean, I believe it, and I know for a fact from looking at the Midnight in Salem credits that there's an outsource company that's majorly credited with helping with the writing of this game. So again, like why would they know anything about this universe? Like they don't inhabit it in the way that any member of the previous Her Interactive team. Like at the very least, Kathy Reuter and Nick Blahunka, whatever changes they're introducing when they were at the helm of designing games, at least they both came in during the experimental era, so they would have worked with Anne Ludwig. They would have worked with Robert Riedel. Like they knew
to kind
these
of understand the foundation of what had already been done.
They understood what they were working from, and so Midnight in Salem tried to bring in little connections,
but it just felt forced.
It just rang. Yeah, it felt so false to me, and I'm just like, I don't believe this is a Nancy Drew game in the same way. And so what ended up happening, sadly, and I feel bad because of the whole conversation that we just had, kind of like genuinely giving some kudos to Mystery of the Seven Keys for seeming to do a better job of like trying to bridge the gap. Like we're going to keep moving forward with modernization, but we're also going to tap into tradition, or as Rue said, like touches of nostalgia. Unfortunately, what largely has happened for me is Mystery of the Seven Keys is trying to do that, and I appreciate it so much. I really, really do. But again, Midnight in Salem, I'm just going to say it, like, it did a lot of damage for me personally as a player. So Mystery of the Seven Keys, actually, for all of those references, and I love the big three so much for taking the time to weave those in, they ring a little bit, like, they ring kind of hollow for me, and almost like you're trying to convince me that these are the same games, it's the same universe, it's the same Nancy Drew, but I don't buy it. And I'm not saying that like as a criticism of them for doing that. I don't think it's their fault. I really do just think it's like Midnight in Salem just gifted something so much for me that like Mr. the Seven Keys wasn't enough to overcome it. Now maybe I'm like maybe as they make more games, again, if the modern era continues with that trend, maybe it can kind of undo the damage, because then Midnight in Salem will almost become like this like that was just a random, like, they had an issue, like that you know and we'll just like act like that game was just a blip on the radar, it doesn't exist. But I don't know, what I'm stuck with right now is I have these two games, and it just really has kind of thrown me off. Like I was like, and then the other thing is, again, that this leaning into games that feel more grown up and more serious, like the story having more serious elements. And we can talk in our next episode about like how Mystery of the Seven Keys does that specifically, but we touched on it already with Midnight in Salem. The modern era of Nancy Drew games to me so far doesn't feel super funny, doesn't have that like silliness and kind of embracing the wackiness. And just like what I had said earlier about how Brittany comes across to me, she sounds like such a serious, uber professional detective. And maybe part of that's the dialogue she's being given or how she's being coached, but I'm like, I feel like, again, it's a different Nancy Drew. I genuinely do feel like there's Lonnie's Nancy. She had all her mysteries to solve, and right now there's Brittany's Nancy. And she's a much more grown up, mature, serious 18-year-old detective.
Yeah.
So I'm
And
kind of sitting again with a disconnect. Like that kind of is, if I had to like boil this down to one word, it's there's a disconnect for me.
yeah. And honestly, Tori, I feel like it's almost hard not to have a disconnect, because so many of the changes that happened all at once, that's like, it's just kind of hard not to be disconnected and
Yeah.
and not feel like it's different worlds, you know? Um yeah.
Yes. And maybe just to give one example of how this plays out in the story, Midnight in Salem in a lot of ways feels like a commentary on like the prejudices of the justice system.
Yeah.
Both like the current justice system, but also like the justice system at the time of the Salem witch trials.
Sure, yeah.
Like those are very heavy subjects.
Sure.
And topics that like people out in society are debating very seriously. This is not Nancy talking to the Hardy Boys on the phone while she's sitting in a kayak saying, I think someone may have enticed an orca into a life of crime. Like that's so
that campiness.
over the top.
Yeah.
And lighthearted and just embrace, like, what a ridiculous thing to say, but oh, do we love it.
Yeah.
And I'm not feeling that in the modern era. So the tone is just completely different. So again, this is all like how the stories feel to me, how the writing feels to me. Like, and it makes so much sense to me knowing that I am who I am, that writing would make such a big deal to me.
Sure.
So yeah. So what I find right now is I'm kind of stuck in this this tension of, I love the first 32 games. I love even the really bad ones, like the Shattered Medallion. Because again, you know what? For all its problems, oh, is it wacky? And I still believe, it still feels like it's part of the Nancy Drew universe. So I love all of those games, good and bad. I love their strengths and their weaknesses. And I want to love the modern era game. I want to get on board with them in the same way, but I feel like stuck. I'm like, I don't know how to bridge the gap. I don't know how to make these two things work together, and I don't know if it's possible to make them work together. I'm like, because again, we don't have enough modern era games. I was like, maybe game 35 will just change my life and put all these issues to bed. I have no idea. So right now I just have to live in the tension. So actually what I've done basically for myself at this point is a bit of kind of compartmentalizing. Is even though this is not how Her Interactive markets the games, I basically in my own mind am treating it like games 1 through 32. That's the classic Nancy Drew series. And then Midnight in Salem and Mystery of the Seven Keys, I kind of like, I don't really think of them as 33 and 34. I think of them as 1 and 2 in a new Nancy Drew series. Like, so here's classic Nancy Drew, 32 games of that. Here's modern Nancy Drew, and we have 2 games in that series. And I basically have just had to kind of do that because I feel like, at least for now, it's the only way I'm going to be able to learn to love like a new normal. I think if I just keep sitting in that tension, then I'm just gonna be perpetually stuck in, like, I'm just comparing,
Yeah.
and I'm seeing all the ways that the new games are not like the old games, and so I'm just gonna sit there and be grumpy, like, well, you didn't do that, and you're missing that, and that didn't work, and why didn't you do that?
I think that's a very fair thing to say. Actually, when you said that, it almost kind of reminded me of, like, you've got the classic yellow hard books. Now these are the Nancy Drew case files that come out like in the 80s and 90s. Like, they're just a different.
Honestly, yes, that's a great way to think of it. And I actually just read Secrets Can Kill, which is, I think, the first case file book. I just read it for the first time a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so definitely not like the hardcovers with some of the things like it's just
very of its time.
Yeah. So
I think you're right. I think you're right in feeling that way, and there is a lot of, I guess, truth in the fact that I feel like a lot of us, we have a disconnect there, and it's difficult for us to enter into 33 and 34 and think of it as a continuation, when maybe it would just be easier to just say, no, we'll just treat this like it's its own entity and separate the two.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a better way of approaching it.
Yeah. And I want to hold some optimism that maybe if they keep pursuing this route of
that the bridge connects better,
making the bridge connect, actually, like, that maybe again I will feel more like, yes, it all fits again, and it all feels like one.
Maybe so.
But for now, I would just prefer, in my own mind, for my own sake, so that I can learn to accept the newness of everything. Like, I'm just trying to treat them as different. And I have, on this matter, something that I feel is definitely a hot take. And please, people, like, don't come for me for what I'm about to say. Because I have thought long and hard about this, and this is just me being totally, like, open and saying where I'm at right now. Like, for me, this is to the point of, even I am open to, and kind of wondering even if it might be better if they just did a complete, like, let's just do a clean break in all of the ways. As in, you know what I said at the beginning of this conversation about how Ned didn't feel right, Frank and Joe didn't feel right. Maybe if Nancy must also be new, maybe they also need to be new as well, and they need to find new voice actors so that, and just chart your own course with new people voicing all of the characters, and don't worry so much about trying to make connections to the older games. Like, start doing your own world building. Like, I don't know if they want to do something when Nancy starts a detective agency with Frank and Joe. Like, that was a new idea that was introduced. Or they introduced Zane Garrett in Mystery of the Seven Keys. Maybe start making him like the new recurring character that we really like. Like, I don't know. I'm not. I don't know. I would say I'm open to that and just contemplating if maybe it would just be easier for me if they just made a clean break. Like, because they've already changed so many things, why not just change a few more? I don't know. It's hard for me to commit to that and say like I won't say that's what I want, but more just like I feel like it's a big deal that feel like I'm open to it and even considering. Like, that just tells me how kind of seismic the shift has been for me as a player. That I am seriously contemplating. Like, Joe Hardy is my favorite character. Rob Jones voices him perfectly. Like, for me to entertain the notion that there needs to be a different Joe, because unfortunately those voice actors are also getting old too, and they can't do it forever. So I don't know. And I feel, again, we talked about the modern era today and just kind of have said a lot of like, this is what it is right now, and it might change. We'll just have to wait and see. I kind of feel like I'm literally like, that is my story as a Nancy Drew fan right now. Like, this is how I feel right now, today, as you ask me this question. Ask me again after game 35 comes out, and you might get a completely different answer.
Well, and I think
I am trying to be optimistic.
I think that's fair to say, and I think that's actually probably a great place to kind of, end on, is that we won't know until more is given to us. And I think that a lot of fans are in a better place than they were when Midnight in Salem released, because I think that Mystery in the Seven Keys was more favorable for people, and I think that they're just waiting to see what's next and where's it going to keep going. And I think at that point, when we get a third game kind of wrapped up in this, we'll be able to better say, okay, I see where they're going and I can get down with it. But time will tell. And so I guess we'll see when.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I guess we'll see when that comes, when our glorious case of the missing clue, because it's still missing right now. We have no information on it. So, but hopefully it's coming soon. But it's really exciting because we get to dive way deeper in next week's episode with Mystery of the Seven Keys. And Tori and I are very excited about that, because this is going to be like one of the first times that we get to do like a very, very good deep dive on the newest Nancy Drew game. I know, Tori, you've had your review out, but I have definitely never gotten to share my like hard assessed thoughts and onions, on Keys. So I'm very looking forward to having this conversation with you next week.
Yes, and if y'all check your calendars, we won't tell you why Mystery of the Seven Keys is the focus of next week, but just stare at your calendars a little bit. You all are smart detectives, and I'm sure you'll be able to put the pieces together for why next Wednesday is all about Mystery of the Seven Keys. So this has been a wonderful conversation.
It's been excellent.
And always.
Always a great deep dive with you, my friend. And so glad that we get to interact with all of you guys in the live chat and also just the comments. We love to kind of hear and see your onions and your stories. So let us know below what you thought of today's episode and if you have any comments. But as for now, we're closing out, and we will see you guys next week. Bye, you guys.
Bye, everyone.